If you want to always sound great playing blues, then there's one pattern you really need to know that does it all, from chords to rhythm to lead lines and double stops. Now you're about to hear me play through a 12 bar, and it might look like I'm using a lot of scales and doing a lot of complicated things, but really I'm just playing each chord as it comes. Take a listen and then we'll break it down. So let's start by very quickly learning the pattern that we're going to be using throughout this video. So we're going to be in the key of G here, and here's our G chord. And now just notice this starts at fret 3 and goes through fret 4 up to fret 5, right? So that's going to be the boundaries of where we're playing. And what we want to do for our pattern is just on the top 4 strings, take all the notes at the 3rd fret and all the notes at the 5th fret there, and then in between we're going to have just on the G string the note at the 4th fret as well. And what we want to do when we play that note, we're generally going to be hammering onto it like that. So we've got 4 notes here, the hammer on, and then 4 notes here, 3, 4, 5. So that's the shape that we're going to be using. I've sometimes called this the blues chord scale in other videos, but really just think of it as a pattern which is based around this G chord here. Then of course in the key of G we've also got a C chord that will go up to as the 4 chord, so there again we can play starting at the 8th fret this time, those 4 notes on the top 4 strings, the little hammer on just on the G string, and then the 4 notes at the 10th fret, same on the D chord, we're just making that shape around the chord there. So that's the pattern, but what can we do with it? Well, let's kick off with what's really an essential blues rhythm approach. So we're back on the G chord here, and we're just going to bar these 3 strings, D, G and B, at the 3rd fret there, and then hammer on only on the G string to the 4th fret. So that's the first part, which really spells out a G7 chord, and then up to the 5th fret, bar those same 3 strings, D, G and B. Now this spells out a C chord, and we can just rock back and forth between that G7 and that C chord, and this gives us loads of possibilities for all different types of rhythm patterns. Something like that, maybe over something straight, maybe over something swung, it would be more. And just notice there, I can trill that hammer on to give it a bit more extra spice. So let's hear how that sounds over the track. Now I'm using a fairly upbeat, straight rock and roll style feel to give it some energy here, but all of this will work just as well over a swung, slower blues style feel. Now let's look at how we move from this rhythm approach to something that more resembles a solo. Then moving this up into a more lead type approach, let's start off by playing the 2 top strings here at the 3rd fret, so we can maybe play those twice, and then come down to the 5th fret on the G and B strings together, so we've got, and then to the 3rd fret on the G and B strings, but with that hammer on just the G string to the 4th fret, like so. And then from there we could either go back up to the top strings, or we could come down to this lower root here at the 5th fret on the D string, so maybe like so, landing on that root, or going back up higher on the 2nd option there. Then to lead us into this, we could add on a Chuck Berry style intro, so we're just going to slide from 3 to 4 on the G string, and then 3 on the B string, 5 on the B string. And you get that kind of sound going. Back into the little rhythm pattern there. And once again this works on all the chords, so up to C, and we're just going to do exactly the same thing, but using that pattern around the 8th fret there. Now back to the track and see how I play a lead riff and then straight back into that rhythm approach, and how this gives a lot of freedom to instantly switch between rhythm and lead. take this a step further with what we'll call the 7th extension. Now this time we're just going to step outside of our shape slightly, but it's going to give us loads of extra blues feel. So we've already got this, and we're just going to come up 2 frets on the G string and up 1 fret on the B string. So we've got 7 on the G with 6 on the B, a D and an F, and this really strongly spells out the dominant feel of this G7 chord. So we could play the riff we had before, maybe like that, but then up to those 2 notes, 7 on the G with 6 on the B, you really hear that bluesy sound. Slide into those and then back down through 5 on the G and B strings, and then 3 with the hammer on just on the G string, and then maybe back to that root. Something like that. Sounds great. Then up to the C chord and exactly the same again. I'm just coming, 2 frets above on the G string there, 1 fret above on the B string, outside of our usual pattern, finding that extra bluesy sound. Like so, and exactly the same on the D chord there. Now of course, we don't always need to start in the same way. It can work well to start on this extended 7th lick as well. Maybe something like that. Now see how this keeps the rhythm driving, but it's much more lead style playing than rhythm. Then we can make all of this a bit spicier by adding some blue notes. So just to remind ourselves, we've got bar at the 3rd fret with that hammer onto the 4th just on the G, and then bar at the 5th fret on all those top 4 strings. Now to find some blue notes, we just want to come to the top 3 strings 1 fret up from there. So now we're going to be at the 6th and we get these 3 notes which sound like they don't really belong with this chord, but that's kind of the point, because these are all blue notes which are really going to add a lot of blues flavour here, and we can use any of these. But then in terms of how to actually incorporate these notes, well, maybe we could start here with a double stop, playing the top 2 strings at once at the 6th fret, giving us 2 of these blue notes at once, and then maybe down to the 5th and down to the 3rd. This is a Hank Marvin style lick really, and we could repeat that over. You could play that all day if you wanted to, and then same again on the G and B strings, 6, 5 and 3, playing 2 strings at once. But maybe when we get to 3 we might want to play the little hammer onto the 4th fret just on the G string to bring us back into that major feel, and then maybe we could end up on that root note there if we need another note. Something like that. Then something else that works great is if we play 5 on the B with 6 on the high E. So we've got these 2 notes, quite crunchy sounding, but then if we bend up just on the B string to kind of get up to that 6th fret note. So really it's the same sound as playing that double stop just at the 6th fret, but with a bend into it on the B string, gives it some extra kind of blues feel as you come up and down. And then maybe I would do something like that, where I'm just going back to the double stop on the 3rd fret on the B and high E strings, and maybe a hammer on and off on the B string to the 5th fret. Something like that. Or I could slide, this sounds really nice, slide from the 3rd up to the 5th and back down again. Something like that. Then of course you know by now, but all of this works on the other chords. So 8th fret for the C chord, there's our bass pattern, and then our 3 blue notes are going to be up 1 fret on the top 3 strings. So here we are at the 11th, and all those same kind of licks are going to work. Same on the D chord, where we've got our 3 blue notes there at the 13th fret. And we can use those to build out bluesy sounding licks as well. So take a listen to these blue notes in action. Finally, we need to bring all these concepts together into one full 12-bar solo, which you already heard at the beginning, but hopefully now makes a lot more sense to you. Now there's just a couple of things in this final solo that I might not have mentioned already. Firstly, when we're on the 1 chord of G and we've got our pattern and go up to the 7th extension, what you'll find there is if you go chromatically up 1 fret and then 1 fret again, you're in position for the pattern over the C chord. So I like to use that as a way up to my 4 chord there, which works really great, so you'll see me doing that. Then you'll also see me using my thumb, something like that, where I'm playing these slides. Now, with these little rhythm patterns that we looked at earlier on in the video, we can always thumb over the top to play the low root note on the low E string. Now, I know this is tricky for a lot of people, but the way I'm doing it in this solo is not quite so bad. So I'm really coming from the G and sliding up to the 5 chord of D, but hitting this D on the low E at the 10th fret with my thumb, and then coming off really with the thumb and playing the little rhythm pattern, and then the same again, up to the 8th fret for the C, like that. So that's just something you can add in. And then lastly, I also did a bit of this, where really we're targeting the double stop on the 3rd fret there on the 2 high strings, but using the bend up at the 5th fret on the G string, which is kind of a Chuck Berry style thing, so you can always add in a bit of that as well. So here we go with the full solo.